You're listening to Hidden Roll, the podcast where we introduce you to the brains behind your favorite toys, games, and all things play. Before we jump into this episode, we'd like to give special thanks to Pop, peopleofplay.com, the one-stop hub for all toy and game inventors. Without them, this podcast would not be possible.
You're listening to Hidden Roll, the podcast that introduces you to the brains behind your favorite toys, games, and all things play. I'm artist, engineer, and game inventor David Yakos.
And I'm game designer Branson Faustini, and together we get to talk to the people who make the world of fun.
And we've got some fun today. We've got some super fun. We've got the brothers Grimes, Keith and Dougal. Thank you, Keith, Dougal, for being here.
Thank you, Ben. Hello, how you doing? The Grimes brothers, back together. The Brothers Grimm.
Brothers Grimm, Brother Grimes. So just as a quick background, let's start with Dougal here. Dougal started in the toy industry. Started his career at the Hasbro's European headquarters in 2008 after graduating in product design engineering from the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow, Scotland. After working marketing and sales and product development and focusing on the UK and German markets, he moved into the creative side of the business as head of inventor relations for Hasbro's Gaming at their USA headquarters. That's where I got to know Dougal. In 2019, he joined Spin Master, a leading global children's entertainment company, at their New York City office, and is currently the vice president of inventor relations and innovation. He's also considered to be the best of the Grimes brothers in every possible dimension. That, howbeit, is contested with by Keith here. We've got Keith as a digital health and innovation consultant, clinical product manager, and UK-based primary care physician with over 25 years of frontline experience in the NHS and medtech industry. He has led clinical and product teams to develop world-class data-driven products at Babylon, such as Symptom Checker, Monitor, and Health IQ. Using AI and digital health technology, he's targeting the widening gap between healthcare demand and supply through his work at Curistica. He has spoken globally and served as an expert panelist for the NHS Topol Review and UK All-Party Parliamentary Group on AI. He is the eldest of the Grimes boys and the original and widely acknowledged to be the most impressive, talented, and handsome. So, gentlemen.
Indisputable facts.
Liar. Absolute.
Thank you for being here. That's a mouthful, I know, but of the people I know, you guys are two warriors that have done a lot of big stuff. So this doesn't even begin to touch, I guess, some of the things that you guys have done and had your hands on. Let's dive on in, and I guess I started with Dougal here. Dougal, why don't you tell us a little bit about really how you got into the toy biz and a little bit of your background?
Oh, well, thanks for having us on to start with. A little bit about my background, how I got into the toy and game industry. And infuriatingly, it does involve Keith's influence, which it grinds at me every day. But well, it's actually two things. It involves the discussion we'll be having about AI and also Keith's influence. So when I left high school, I didn't really know what to do. And I went to Keith being the oldest, and he was like a sort of feeble old owl. And, and I asked him for his advice on what I should do. And he said, well, robots are going to be pretty big in the future. You should do artificial intelligence. So I actually studied for a year at Edinburgh University, artificial intelligence and software engineering, which was excruciating. And I was like,
My revenge was almost complete before you started.
Oh my God, doing Prologue and learning C and stuff like that. It wasn't as much fun as I thought it was. So I decided to change, and I did something that I had an initial interest in, which was product design. I moved to the university in Glasgow, and when I finished, I really, really wanted to design toys and games. Like that was my main thing, because as a family, we always play games. Like 6 brothers, I don't think we uttered a single word of, affirmation or love to each other, but like crushing competition. And that was our love language, right, Keith?
Yeah.
We would play games, make up games, just so that we could just connect and hang out.
Yeah, we had to invent games to emotionally connect.
That's what you get with 6 boys from Scotland.
And who's winning? Like, what's 6 of you guys? We got the oldest and the baby.
It's inevitably me that's winning. Actually, just to interrupt Dougal's introductions to the games world, like I won't go much further beyond the arrival of Dougal in the world back in the early 80s. He was the youngest of all of us. He's about 10 years younger than me. But even like one of my earliest memories of Dougal was this game that we invented called, we didn't really have a name for it, but I got to call it the drooling game. It's a very simple game. So Dougal was crawling at this point, no teeth, drooling a lot. There's 6 of us, me, Stuart, Andrew, Alistair, Graham, and Dougal. The 3 eldest, me, Stuart, and Andrew, and then Alistair will be around as well. We'd all lie on the carpet, face up with our heads facing towards Dougal, who'd be placed a little bit of a distance away. And then you'd have to lie down with your arms down by your side, and Dougal would start crawling and gurgling and moving towards us. Wouldn't know which person he would come to go towards. But whoever he went to, the minute he chose, everyone else would pile on top of the other person so they couldn't move, and Dougal would just drool all over their faces. And that is one of my earliest memories of my brother, as being a literal physical playing piece in a torture game with my brothers. I loved it.
I was 18 years old.
That was last week. Yeah.
I mean, we played so many different games. I mean, that's probably quite deeply rooted in my psyche, right? That type of gameplay. But we were always playing games as a young, even to the extent of Keith. You used to play quite a lot of games, like Steve Jackson games. There was a lot of that, and oh man, what was the one with the hexagon? Had the hexagon, the tiles.
Oh, Kings and Things.
Yeah, Kings and Things and stuff like that, which were like not kind of, they were beyond me, but I would just like happily sit, observe and play that. And Alistair, the sort of middle brother, he got really into Games Workshop. And, I would just like flick through White Dwarf, and I'd watch them play Blood Bowl and Space Hulk. And then Space Crusade came out, which was I think it was the Milton Bradley version of the Games Workshop games, right? And so it was a more accessible version. Alistair really wanted it, and I wanted it, of course, but Alistair saw an opportunity that he embedded in me a rhyme that I still to this day, we still joke about, so that I would ask for it for Christmas so he could play it. And that was for my birthday. What do you want for your birthday? Space Crusade. What do you want for your birthday? Space Crusade. So I got Space Crusade, and immediately after opening it, he took it and just like played it with his mates.
You're a pawn.
I know, just a pawn again. So I mean, we could go on. There were so many different games, but going back to the question, playing games is always a big part of life. And when I did product design, I was always interested in, toys, novelty products, game playing. And so I thought to myself, there must be a route to be able to do this as a job. So I looked online and went to the top 3 companies: Hasbro, Mattel, Lego, from what I saw, and Hasbro were hiring at the time. So I decided to join them in 2008, which kind of led me on the direction. But that was my kind of like first introduction into the toy and game industry.
And Keith, you, I guess, haven't been in the play industry, but play has been important to you since the beginning, obviously. So how has that impacted you? Because you're working as a practitioner. Yeah,
and I suppose people will often because I work in a sort of interesting and very sort of popular branch of medicine now, digital health or health technology, particularly with AI, and there's a lot of other doctors wanting to get into it, and they sort of say, what first made you want to do medicine? I was like, I never wanted to do medicine. I wanted to write games. I wanted to play games and do computer games, particularly at the time. because I just loved it. My earliest memory was like watching Thunderbirds, the Jerry Anderson show on TV, and always loved, the sort of puppet stuff. And I've always, God, that makes me sound bloody ancient. Anyway, I always really loved that kind of thing. And a lot of my early memories are just like, I remember really clearly getting hold of, like, really pining after Mousetrap. I remember Mousetrap and Kerplunk and all these kind of board games that we'd have, and we'd play with my brothers. And back in those days, you'd probably pick them up from jumble sales. I don't know what you call them in the US, maybe garage sale type things. And you'd get hold of them. So we always had board games around that I'd play with this ever increasing number of people to play games with, my brothers, and friends too. So it was a fantastic time. And then this thing started to get really kind of serious when I hit my teenage years. We were living in Singapore, and I got introduced to Dungeons and Dragons. And I can still clearly remember where I was when I got my first D&D kit. My mom got it for me. I think it was for Christmas, and it was the old D&D kit, Advanced D&D, and the red box that got rebooted. But the dice you got inside, you get a crayon to kind of fill it out. Right. Fill out the dice. And I remember just reading the manuals and just like studying them and like trying to get hold of the monster manual, and then, learning about it, playing it at school after school, and really getting deep into that. And then Traveller, which is like, the Traveller's the most sort of like lifelike and sort of sending your characters to university for 40 years before they sort of set foot on a spaceship kind of thing. I really enjoyed the lore. And of course, like Dougal said, Games Workshop as a Brit, Games Workshop, and really loomed large in it. Steve Jackson Games, I remember playing a lot of those. Car Wars in particular, I absolutely loved. Used to go into my friend's house and play that. And naturally, as you were doing that, you start to think, well, I'd like to start making some games of my own. So we made a whole bunch of like Formula One, like NASCAR type racing games, which we would customize the track. That makes for quite challenging reading now because it's quite old-fashioned attitudes captured in it.
What was the one with the oil rigs? There was one that you...
Yeah, oil rigs. Yeah, so there was a game, right? So big fan of 2000 AD, of course. And there was a game that came out called Block War. And Block War was a board game where you'd have two blocks, like in 2000 AD Mega City 1, these blocks would fight each other. So Block War was a game that you play, but of course I didn't have the money to play it. So I created a version
to get it for his birthday. What do you want for your birthday?
Keith didn't have the nous like
I was. I was the honorable brother in this one. So I decided instead of convincing my younger brother to get it for me, we wrote a game called Rigged, where two oil rigs would be fighting against one another. And me and my friend Sander de Groot, he did one side and I did the other side. All my characters were kind of, I don't know, Japanese skeletons for some reason. It was all based...
Yeah, they were like samurais, right?
Yeah, all samurais. There was robots and submarines, and I don't know. I mean, we didn't play it very much, but we loved making that game. I've still got it upstairs somewhere. It's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. I still remember the tokens were like paper, but with a bit of sellotape, or what do you call it? Scotch tape. Just wrapped around it. And they had like a certain texture to them, like a slidey texture.
It's very important. Yeah, well, because I didn't have any sort of like clear adhesive, so I'd use sellotape, and I'd sort of carefully put it in place to make sure that it was as smooth as possible. And I remember putting all the pieces, all the parts, were in like party popper cases and everything. It was all kind of cobbled together from things that I found. But oh my God, that was just like the most fun. And I think it all peaked when we made a game called All-Star Wrestling. It's quite big into our wrestling as well. And so we built a hexagonal, like a sort of hexagonal ring, almost like not quite an octagon, where you'd create characters and then you'd wrestle against each other and have special moves and everything. That was awesome.
So the working in the medical industry, it seems like still today, play has become like an important aspect of your life. Like, I don't like why is that? Is it a place to get away? Is it somewhere to just have fun? What's how does that really speak to the medical side?
I mean, play is important for everyone anyway. It's not like just, I'm not unusual in that fact. It's just that I, a bit more voluble about the games that I play and a bit more sort of confident about expressing it. But everyone likes to play, games of some sort and enjoy things. And for me, it was, certain types of board games. And I think over time, what I realized is that for people, particularly in the mental health space, I mean, when I was working as a doctor, I suffered from burnout and became quite unwell. I took about 5 months off and was quite depressed. And I remember at that time, for anyone who's listening or watching with depression, treats a lot of people with depression. And then when depression comes and visits, it's kind of impressively hellish. I'll tell you that much. And one of the things that happens is this sort of inability to enjoy anything. It's really horrific. But to get out of that hole with all the kind of medicine and therapy and help, when the therapists I saw talked about behavioral activation, the process of doing things that give you pleasure, give you joy, as a way of returning to that space, even though I wasn't much enjoying anything at the time. And a few years earlier, me and a guy called Sam Watt here in the UK, in Lewis, near where I live, set up a board game club in Lewis. And when I became unwell, I stopped going to it. And as I started to recover, I thought, well, I should really start board gaming again. And so I'd go along, and there was something about being in the presence of other people who really enjoyed games. And, I was finding it slightly harder to get back into. I wasn't concentrating quite as well. And they would play games that weren't quite as furiously complex. But, it was familiar, and I'd spend time with people. I'd play these physical games, just the physical aspect of it all, going through the things that were so important to me when I was younger, started to kind of build that fire again inside myself and the enjoyment. And so from within that, I started to feel the happiness and joy again. It had been there before, and it was a key for me coming back. And I am not unique in this. I've since seen other people do it too. The importance of joy, play, social connection is critical in staying well and being happy, but also in illness. And so it's got an important part to play there as well. Yeah. So I've wrapped it very much into my practice now.
That's great. It's like better than a Band-Aid. It's like a fixing from the inside. I'm sure you're seeing that too, Dougal, and because you're in a 24/7 play. I don't know how many games you've introduced me to, but there's always, hey, here's the new game, here's the new game, here's the new game. I'm assuming you see that as well.
Yeah, I mean, the cool thing about the board game industry, tabletop games, however you want to describe it, is really impressively grown over the past 20 or so years in a more global and mass sense, and become in its own right not a legitimate time for people to spend either on a date night or with friends, like game nights and things like that. And it's definitely, there's so many hallmarks of it that resonate here that people are looking, particularly since the advent of smartphones, right, where everyone has this device in their pocket and they can access all the information at any time. And I think that the rise of board games has been a complementary to that people, especially younger families now, have grown up with this, want to switch off, connect, tangibly connect with things, as Keith was describing, and sit around a table. And then also maybe a little bit of dissociation, in the sense of role playing, or, any good game has that element of it. Even if you go from Monopoly, not all of them are like that, but you're playing a role. Even if people play a game of poker, they're pretending they're the guy in a casino wearing their sunglasses upside down. That there's an element of getting out of yourself, which I think is important to that, which helps. But ultimately, it's that connection around the table and just having a laugh, disconnected from smart devices or digital devices. So it's been really interesting over the past 20 years. Well, since I've been in it, 15 years, of seeing the growth of that, it being there, and helping people across, all different types of life.
Speaking of a changing world, AI is becoming bigger and bigger over the last 5-ish or so years, really exploding now. Still a little bit in the frontier. We don't really know where things are going, how things are going to change. But Keith, you are now working in AI. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. And it's, from Dougal's story earlier on about me saying back in, what was it, the 90s, saying, oh, this is going to be the next big thing.
2000, it was literally the millennium. It was the year 2000.
It was when Terminator 2 came out. That was really when it all
be a wee bit
sparked.
later than that right now. Yeah, well, I suppose like on sort of geological terms, it's been the blink of an eye, of course. I mean, it feels like a slow burn from the inside, but no, yes, you're right. I mean, I love and I'm passionate and interested in all forms of technology and not just in healthcare, like in everything. I just love it all. Within that, artificial intelligence has been something that I've always been very interested in. But it was really it was sort of in the mid 2010s, I was really very interested in virtual reality and immersive tech. I was using VR with my patients, maybe a conversation for another time. It's a really interesting space. But the interesting thing about VR and metaverse, as they like to call it now, is it's kind of not quite there yet. I think there's a few steps to go. But working with technology in healthcare, I had an opportunity back in 2018 to join a company called Babylon. And Babylon was UK-based, grew into the US, grew spectacularly fast, and actually, flew a bit too close to the sun and has burnt and folded in the US, and big chunks of it fold in the UK now. Different story for another time, but in this sort of upward curve as it was growing very fast, and providing video consultations for people at a time when, many people thought this was crazy. How on earth could you provide healthcare remotely? Babylon was doing it. And within that, they had something called the symptom checker. And the symptom checker, the idea behind it was to use artificial intelligence or technologies within the field of artificial intelligence. So people could report symptoms. I've got a cough, I've got a headache, and then get an idea of whether it's something that they should be seeing a doctor about and in what kind of time frame, so-called triage outcome, but also get some information about what the cause of it might be as well, so they can understand things a little better. And the idea behind that was that might help alleviate some of the burden on healthcare and help people. Started out with much more simple expert systems, and then I got involved when it was using Bayesian probabilistic models. I won't go into any more detail than that, just a slightly more advanced version that was explainable. And then sort of fell in love with the idea of trying to use these technologies to help people. And that was the sort of firing pistol. And working at Babylon, I got to work with some incredible engineers and AI researchers and just threw myself into learning all about it, and seeing how it could work with healthcare. And the last 4 or 5 years, I've been involved in not only learning about it and building the stuff, but trying to get it out there and actually get it effectively working. And then with generative AI, large language models, ChatGPT and the like, they've been around for a little while, but it's only really this last year or so that people have just gone, holy smokes, look at this, what on earth is happening? And we're definitely at an inflection point. It's a really exciting time.
I'm going to ask Keith a couple of questions because,
I'm so scared because I know the first question. We're on a podcast. So you
just relax.
Remember
brother.
that time when we were 7 and you didn't know?
Yeah.
What you drink is like Guinness.
It's alcohol-free Guinness, but yes.
Alcohol-free Guinness. Wow.
Kind
of pointless. But anyway, I know in this podcast, we'll have a broad array of people and their experience with AI. Could you just, crib notes on the differences of definition, AI, machine learning, large language model, and generative AI? Maybe if that's too much, but just so that we can kind of frame these up.
Yeah. Explain it to us like we're a 5-year-old.
All right, okay. Well, I'll just fire up ChatGPT.
I'm about to drool on you.
Yeah, you're crawling towards me, and I'm going to explain it to you. And if I don't satisfactorily explain it, you're going to just drool on my face. All right, okay. All right, let's keep it really simple. There's a lot of different definitions of artificial intelligence, some complex, some simple. The simplest one is that using machines to do things that otherwise require a human brain to do. That's like it, that would typically require human intelligence to do. That's like the superset. That is artificial intelligence. It's been around since the 1950s or even slightly before that. Huge amounts of research in that area. Within that, and all the different things that machines can do that replicate, not just like the thinking that we do, but memory and calculation and inference and all that. Within that, the sort of next layer inside is machine learning. And machine learning is where computer systems will learn from, make decisions, and make predictions from data, any old data. And it can start with, simple statistics like nonlinear regression all the way up to incredibly complex methods. But basically what you're doing is you're getting machines to look at data at a scale that humans can't really wrap their head around and spot patterns. And from those patterns, do useful things like predict things. And that's machine learning. So there's artificial intelligence. Machine learning is a kind of branch of artificial intelligence. And then the sort of next layer down within that is deep learning. And deep learning and neural networks, you've sometimes probably heard of as well, is a sort of form of machine learning where the architecture, the way that they build this, is modeled very much like the human brain. It's built on something called a neural network, these sort of synthetic neurons, these mathematical representation of the nerve cells in your brain and the connections. And, what will happen is a nerve cell will get to another nerve cell of this synapse and it will trigger a reaction. If it goes over a certain threshold, it will trigger the next one. You basically just model that. And if you model that at a reasonably large scale and then show it data and train it in an unsupervised way, as in you don't have to tell it what the data is, it can just work out the patterns within that and then make useful predictions off the back of that. So that's deep learning. And the important thing about deep learning is that deep learning can be very, very difficult to explain, as in you can't work out why sometimes it's sometimes called black box as well, because you can't really see inside it.
From a actual use case scenarios, would like deep learning be something like somehow Google's going to know this is a picture of a border collie?
Yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah, they might use large neural networks like recurrent neural nets, convolutional neural nets, any of these sort of different ways of doing it mathematically. But basically what you do is in a supervised fashion, you build this model and you say, here's 10 million pictures of dogs and here's 10 million pictures of not dogs. I've told you that those are dogs and those aren't dogs. And you train it and then you show it a picture of a dog or not a dog that it hasn't seen before and say, is that a dog or not? And it will give you a prediction of that. And you'll have seen many of these things, the little picture, box saying cat 99% or something like that. And it's not just pictures, it's anything that can be represented in data in a sequential form. So that could be sound, music, genetic data, or text. And of course, that's where large language models come in. And as you use these sort of these neural nets and this deep learning, you get towards generative models. And generative models are slightly more recent. They've been around for a little while, but they're slightly more recent. And what they do is that they don't take data and just say, this is a cat, this is a dog, or anything like that, or whatever you want to train it for, make predictions. But it can actually generate output as well. So you can essentially do the opposite. Say, show me a dog, and it will generate a picture of a dog.
Like examples, this like Discord making, or not Discord, but
Midjourney on Discord.
Making renderings of some wild thing, a unicorn riding a bicycle, or ChatGPT. Would that be kind of the same thing from a verbal or a written standpoint?
Yeah, there'll be some people who are watching this who are just tearing their hair out at the oversimplification, but broadly speaking, they fall into generative AI models, yes. And it can be in one modality, like text or pictures, or it could be multimodal, as in it could be text and pictures. But Stable Diffusion or DALL-E or Midjourney are one example. What they've done is they've trained a model on like millions upon millions of pictures, which have got associated text with them as well, sort of descriptors and the like. And then they train these models, and then you can put the text in, and it will generate images off the back of it. And this is, again, that's a gross simplification, but basically it's much easier to go out and just play around with Midjourney, which you can do on Discord for free, or DALL-E or Bard, I think does it as well with Google. There's lots of different ways or Ideogram is another interesting one. And just play around with it. And it can be really impressive stuff. And, when using it, I've used it for a whole bunch of different things. Just yesterday, I gave a presentation on generative AI and used images created within it to help illustrate the presentations that I've done. And I often thought, back when I was making rigging, I might have made it slightly different at the time if I had access to something like DALL-E or Midjourney or something like that.
Right. That's kind of a cool segue there. because you're talking about the creation of board games, right? And so I think this is a good point where, you know, we've talked to you, David and Branson, about me and Keith and our growing up and games being an important part, taking different paths, like in terms of career. But then now it like all of this merging and this kind of conversation that's happening between us, between my role, which is board game development. I'll come back into that. And Keith now, which is, you know, his consultancy based on AI and that being a broad scope. And for me at the moment, you know, I work for a large entertainment company that publishes physical games and digital games as well, but toy product. And my whole role is effectively like an R&D function. You know, I facilitate working with external creatives so that our company can partner with them, and we end up licensing items, developing items together, partnering on them to release products. Okay. Particularly, you know, in the board game world, we have a large lineup of games and brands. We create new games and brands. And an important thing before we start this discussion, that it is, you know, the company I work for, you know, is a large, you know, corporation, and we have an AI policy. And I think that to preface this for any of the creatives out there, there's a lot of ethical and legal issues that come with this. And I think we want to try and, you know, address that just now so that we can have a creative discussion. But, you know, IP ownership being one of the biggest ones. You know, what you're doing when you're working with these different platforms and where the ownership and IP creation is. And then using it as a tool, which I think we're more going to discuss, to facilitate, and Keith actually gave me these terms, like empower and enable a creative to make better product in a sense.
There's sort of
higher quality.
There's that fear of people losing their jobs, like with some of these abilities just to, now anybody's a writer, at least they feel that way, or anybody is now an artist, being able to type in a prompt and get an image. There's sort of that fear of people losing those different types of jobs, but what you're doing is you're empowering people to have more of an ability. So I think that's something we really need to touch on.
AI just happens to be our most current toy tool. It's got a very broad range of uses, but like you just look back through history and the sort of the fury over the printing press and, you know, bicycles and any number of different physical technologies were seen as like the ruin of our nation and the ruin of civilization, you know, that will destroy jobs. And, you know, undoubtedly things have changed very substantially over the years, but things have changed also for the positive too. I think Dougal's right. You know, much as I hate to say that Dougal's right about anything, I think you know, sort of thoughtful about this as well. And what he was saying there about the IP side is really important, because remember, a lot of these large models are trained off enormous amounts of data off the internet, like percentages of the internet, and will have been trained on data that conceivably didn't have within its terms of use that it could be used to train AI. So the question as to, you know, copyright and everything is still being kind of nutted out, I suppose, isn't it?
I was just thinking, like, to aid this discussion as a thought experiment, we can kind of role play a little bit here in the sense that, let's say, Keith, you are a consultant, AI consultant for me who has experience in games, and I am a new board game creator. I have at my access a couple of things. We're in a world where I have access to a platform that is free from those IP concerns. Like, so say it's like, it's not
solved, was kind of solved in this.
It's like an Adobe. Yeah. Imagine it's like an Adobe or Shutterstock or something like that, where we have closed worlds where we know the IP is saying, and I'm subscribed to this, and AI is a tool that helps me access this source that I know is ethical and reputable, and anything in there is owned by who it says it is. Okay, so that'll help us on one aspect of it.
Yeah.
And or these tools are available to me with my growing database. Like, and that's another thing, like, it's okay for me to create things, draw things and all that, and store it on whatever database I have, and then use AI to use that I have created to generate something new, right, Keith? So I've got these kind of two tools that will help us at the moment. And so what we're trying to do now is we could talk about how AI can help me as these AI tools that are available in these fashions to help me be more creative or create something that could be the next, Settlers of Catan or the next Uno or whatever my goal is. These are the things. So this is where we want to kind of take the discussion, I think.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. So we sort of parked some of the worrying things, and for some bizarre reason, you've come to me, but you've probably heard all the wonderful things about me, and you've come through with this idea, learning more about it. And actually, what you said there about like open and closed models is a really interesting one, because one of the interesting things about large language models is that you can get a kind of foundation model, a model that is trained on a huge amount of data and has learned a kind of foundation amount of information about a lot of stuff. So in this experiment, we've got one that we can trust the sort of copyright issues and that's all nailed down. When you have a model like that, there's kind of, when you're trying to build these models, there's three things. Number one, you make your own one from scratch, right? That's hard because you need an enormous amount of data. You need an enormous amount of money and some time. And it's generally beyond you to sort of fire one up from nowhere. But these models can be fine-tuned. You can take one of them and say, all right, well, I've got this model that's performing quite nicely. I'm going to take it away, and I've got my own secret stash of my own IP data, just as you've described there. And what we're going to do is we're going to get this model, but we're going to get it super fine trained on this data. So it's going to, understand and basically perform well in tasks that are similar to this data. And then you could then use that. So let's say, for the sake of argument, we won't talk about a board game company. We'll talk maybe about Microsoft or something like that. They might have their model, and they may train it on all their private documentation and then use it for tasks inside the company, and it'll perform better than the standard model. Or you can use a standard model, and then when you send it instructions, you can give it examples. This is the other thing that's really interesting. It's called in-context learning. And you can give it a question like, draw a picture of a dog. But then what you do is you apply these examples. But here are some examples of dogs that I like. Dogs like this. When I say dog, it has to look a bit like this. And what happens is they perform very well. So you can see how these technologies could be like fine-tuned and work specific to the task at hand. So let's say you come to me and ask about this. It could be that you've got quite a lot of material and you say, I just want some assistance in scaling what I do. Maybe you're going to train a model to work alongside you, learn how you work, and sort of be an extra pair of hands or an external brain to reflect against. That might be a useful thing.
So from a game development standpoint, like boiling it down to like some more simple, tangible ways of using it, I think there's like that early development stage that we look at. It depends on what our deliverable is. If we're just trying to get a concept out, to test it, to validate it, to verify it, even to pitch it to somebody like Dougal who's looking for a play pattern, that's going to be a different output than Dougal when he's working for a corporation that's going to then have to make the final files for production. And so I think there's a little bit of leeway on the creative development side of utilizing a lot of these tools without worrying about any IP constraints. All the time, we're developing games, and we need just to play test this, and we need 50 cards with whatever types of images, and so we will go ahead and render quick images. We need a post-apocalyptic man carrying biohazard material.
Well, yeah, we used to do white paper drawings, just little sketches and things like that. But in the same amount of time, we can now generate something that looks like final art without the expectation that it's going to be sold out there and all that kind of stuff. But if you can do that just as fast as you would before, doing everything by hand, why not make a prototype that looks really nice and gives you a better idea of like, oh, this is how the game is supposed to feel, not just play.
This is where I maybe defer to you all as sort of domain experts on this one is, the product manager in me is really sort of simple on this one. Is like, well, what problems do you face? You don't come and say, I want to use AI. What can I use it on? You start with, as a game designer, what problems do you face? And it could be that when it comes to, let's say, putting together a game for play testing, is it realistic that, hand-drawn, scrappy diagrams on a piece of paper lead to an inferior playtesting experience? In some way, it doesn't work as well, or you're less likely to want to play it. Is there a benefit of having something looking better, or is there something about convincing people to engage when it's looking more appealing?
Yeah, I have an idea how we can approach this. Okay, so my name is Keith Grimes. I'm a young games designer. I've now got my older brother, which is weird. I've made one game without the use of AI, rig it. Okay, I have done that process previously.
How much all the money you need?
So I've made that, and I published it myself, right? So I did the most raw thing possible, and through learning from the literature out there and other games designers, I know the process, right? And I think that there's roughly maybe like 5-6 stages, right? So what I'm going to do is go through each of these stages, and I'll ask you, well, you're not Keith Grimes anymore because I'm Keith Grimes. This has gone a little bit Inception. Who are you then, Keith? What's your name?
No, I'm a future Keith Grimes. I'm
future Keith Grimes.
I'm old Keith Grimes. Travel back to the past with the technology, constrained by causality to only share certain information. So I can't tell you who's going to win the Super Bowl, but I can give you some hints about using the technology of the day.
The first stage of all of this is the research stage, and this can be immersion in whatever's out there. And this is a bit of a nebulous area, but it's like the creation stage. Like, what tools are there that can help me start to bring about what people end up doing with, let's say, mood boards or something like that? I think I've got a loose idea, but I want to get more inputs and start thinking about the type of game I want. What's available to me in that regard?
Past Keith, I now see that you have access to ChatGPT. So let's talk about the technology of today and how it might be able to work. I mean, the first thing to say is that I, in the past, have been happy to use models like this as an aid to reflection. You can put across an idea and say, so I've had this idea for this game, whatever this game is. And I will prompt the machine and say, so, I want you to be an expert game design advisory AI, skilled in understanding the entire breadth of global game design and all history, and but very, very good at understanding early ideas and providing supportive and constructive information to allow the user to explore different ways to approach this idea. That's the first part, the role of the AI. The second part, I'm going to provide you with my idea, whatever it is. And then I want you to step by step go through this and consider whether my game is similar to or different to existing games. If there is anything within it that might be usefully expanded by considering other areas, and share them with me, and then enter into a conversation about how this idea might play out in a different format, let's say. Yeah. And you could do that. You could do that right now, and you might have to play with the prompt a little bit. But what it will do is it will act as, I don't know, it's a little bit like if you're operating on your own and having a sort of trusted person or 3 or 4 people without any of the kind of sort of anxiety of sharing an idea or being criticized, and having an open kind of to and fro on this to help expand your thinking and maybe sort of consider different areas. So that might be one way you could start, is to use generative AI to take you from what is possibly quite a narrow view of it. And I don't know what it's like in the board game industry, but I work with a lot of startups, and they often hold on to their ideas like Gollum. They hold on to them very tightly. They're not going to let go of it at all. It has to be exactly like this. And you spend a lot of time trying to sort of free them up a little bit to actually get to the thing that's of value. And with the smiles there, maybe it's similar with you. It's something the same. It's a sort of safe space to let go of this tight grip and therefore see what else might be possible.
So it's allowing you to look at something with maybe more points of view, even needing to expand the team or ask everybody some other points of view, other rapid iterations. And I love the phrase that I guess Dougal, or it could have been past Keith, said about just the mood boards, of being able to have these like rapid fire mood boards that are, it's not just a bunch of Google images, it's going to be things that are amalgamations and mashups of other things that have never been really seen in that form before.
Yeah. And there's a couple of, going into the empowering and enabling part, there's a couple of important points there that and Keith brought up a really good one about creatives, of which I work with. An idea is very fragile. It's like it can be very fragile, and like there's the sensitivities around it, and someone expressing that and being able to do it in a total sense. If more people are able to do this and create, it's better as a whole for more ideas to come to the forefront, and someone to be able to take it from just inside their head to at least the next level. This one step creates kind of this world in which we can have more diverse points of view, not just from the tool itself drawing upon diverse things to expand upon a single idea and different techniques and processes, but allowing the diversity in the originator of it to be expressive. Some people, a person in different locale, different culture, different background, being able to express these ideas. So there's kind of a two-way effect in that first stage, which is bringing this idea to life from all these different research inputs.
And the ability also the ability to be able to communicate something that is very clearly seen inside the mind's eye, but is very, very difficult for a person to articulate. And some people are very skilled at talking about what they're thinking about or what they see and communicating it to someone else. And in a pre-AI world, that you might have to go and find them and find a person who's skilled to hear this and translate it. And every step of the way takes time, effort, money, heartache, and also some kind of loss of fidelity of that original vision, versus a person having an empowered tool in front of them that can just experiment with a mood board, pump the words into it and say, well, that's quite right. That looks about right, but this game's meant to have a silver dragon, and so you draw a silver dragon. But in my mind's eye, the silver dragon had more legs, and they can rapidly have that kind of to and fro, and externalize the ideas that are inside them to achieve that early communication too. So that's maybe something else that can happen as well. That's otherwise quite hard.
That's a good tool, because only you have your imagination, and trying to describe your imagination, if a picture's worth 1,000 words, it's really can help get that in front of people, even if it is not spot on. It can help accelerate and get those ideas over.
But also in terms of accessibility as well, remember there's 1 to 2% of the population have aphantasia, the inability to be able to picture things in their mind's eye. There's any number of different accessibility and sort of varied sensory experiences that people have, within which will be an incredible depth of creativity and vision as to how to express themselves.
I think that answers like the question earlier. Is it more important to have images, or is it more helpful to have images than just stick figures on white and black cards trying to get an idea across? It's definitely going to be giving the creative an advantage for trying to convey an idea quickly.
Definitely. And I think we can come to that, but we can touch on that. An interesting point in that is that depending on where the creative sits on the scale of things, and we're just using here in this experiment, someone who creates board games, gameplay mechanisms, and let's say an experience, anything that helps that original creator focus on what is in essence the core aspect of the game, be it hardcore mathematical rules of complex strategy, or just a party game. And I always think about, and Keith's going to hate this, but I'm going to use one of my favorite, he's the inventor, designer, creator. His name was GPE Yoko. He's credited as the inventor of the Game Boy. He's a Nintendo, one of their gurus, and he was Shigeru Miyamoto, the inventor of Mario's mentor. And
well known for you, Dougal.
Well known, big Mario Kart fans. Another version of how we could connect over the pandemic, playing Mario Kart and just completely crushing each other. Well, me crushing everyone else, of course. Red shells and all that. But he had a very interesting bunch of design philosophies, which are very typically, the Japanese in their elements of minimalism. But one of them was that, when he was designing games, a famous one was turning the color off, particularly for when trying to sell in the Game Boy, because the colors were, it would add cost, it would drain battery life and all that stuff at the time. So if you could make a game that was just pure black and white and still as enjoyable, that's a better off because of some of the accessibility issues of it. Another experiment he would do is when designing games, he would just do, if there were characters on a screen and you're moving around, just do dots. And then if the game is fun enough just with dots, add on the layers of artwork to describe things. So for example, you would use the artwork for the bad guy, the villain, to explain to players, you don't want to go near this person. So in essence, the artwork creates the story that allows the game to be described. So you add the artwork so I'm not going to go towards that because he's being covered in blood, he has a sword. Go away from that. You don't have to read about it. So there's a lot of interesting things there. And I think that in terms of layering on, as you're saying, the artwork and the selling, what it's doing is, I think with this, is making sure that the time and energy of the creator, young Keith, young designer, is focused on making sure that that game is as fun as possible and the experience as fun as possible, and then curating things above it.
It's a really interesting point. Actually, it's got me thinking about my experience of playing rigging or writing rigging. And like I said before, I spend much more time and had much more fun creating it than actually playing it, and I think that's an important point, that people can fall in love with the art of the creation that's intensely enjoyable for the creator, maybe less so for the people on the outside.
We've done stage one.
Stage one. All right.
Well, that's stage one. You're all right. I'll just.
Oh, actually, I've got one more thing before you move out of stage one. Very briefly, AI can also be used to actually do research. You can actually send out a web crawl, and instead of having to read screeds and screeds of text, it can summarize it all and identify bits that you haven't seen as well. So before we leave the research stage, it can actually act as a research assistant. Right? Carry on, young Keith Grimes.
Stage two is, using these tools that you've got your concept kind of mapped out. You feel like it's a fit for the market, it's product market fit. So you've got something that you think is worthwhile. Then you go into the prototyping phase, right? So now I'm actually either digitally creating something that could be playable or physically creating something that could be playable. So what tools are available to me to be able to do that? I'm still a single designer solo doing this.
So I think, interestingly, at this point, you probably not necessarily need to use artificial intelligence at this point, but actually beyond creating the assets that you can then send somewhere else to create your physical bits and pieces, essentially. There's lots of fabricators online that will make you 3D models, and generative AI will quite happily create 3D models and STLs to print out. That can be done. So you could, instead of having to sweat at home carving these things out or find little wooden pieces, you can actually go and send them off and get them sent back to you, or just buy a 3D printer and go and spit them out yourself as well. So I think, once again, it's a little bit like using generative AI to create the artwork on the cards. You just actually gets you to that sort of slightly more professional stage. And again, my experiences in the world of health tech and digital startups, and one of the great things is that, all these ideas are great, but you need to get them into market. You need to get these assumptions tested. It all may look great on the table in front of you, but get people using it. So I think anything could probably shorten the duration or the time taken from you to have this idea that you've settled on to getting it in front of someone else and actually watching them play it, because that's when the real learning happens.
We're now in stage 3.
Well, on stage 2, we'll often just use just basic white and black cards with Sharpie marker just to get that first thing, the first vibe down. But if we brought in images, then we'll go ahead and do like a quick deck on like Game Crafters or something to print it out.
Yeah. And if I'm a solo creator, still in stage 2, I don't have good resources in terms of time and money, Tabletop Simulator, using generative tools to be able to feed me into like a digital prototype, it can be just as viable. And that allows me as well to do, testing in different time zones, while I'm asleep, or while, I could be doing it, speeds up that time. So it's interesting. Physical models, yes, as well, but digitally as well now, testing with things. And that is stage 3, which overlaps with this stage, right? But stage 3 is the gameplay testing, which I think is a really interesting area, which I want to ask time traveling Keith about. I've now got a couple of prototypes. I've got one. Just say I've got my main one that I think's good. It's my next game. And I want to test this and get feedback on it so I can get to the next stage, which is that iteration part.
Yeah. So I think at this point, this is more about theoretical performance of generative AI and large language models than what I've seen, because I haven't had a chance to practice this. Restricting my conversation to the terminology that I can use without breaking the future. Yes, you can do it. So it all comes down to whether you can describe and serialize how to play a game in a digital form or in a sort of sequence form. Because if you can do that, then you could have a model play test it for you. You could create a number of agents with different characteristics, different personalities, different playing types that you could conceivably train on playing other models, or just train on observing you having played different games, and then bring them in. So you could have a whole panel, conceivably, a big company or even a small company, open models of play testing agents that would either use descriptive terms, or if we're using slightly more advanced technologies, image recognition, and just see the table in front of you and say, yes, move piece A to place B, and so on. So you could actually find a way to play test against different types of people, different agents and so on, or actually just have them play at scale many millions of times when you're sleeping to sort of shake out any of the problems that might happen from this, that might only sort of occur. There might be sort of game-breaking rule issues that happen 1 every 1,000 games, something that you might not pick up on local play, but actually, if your product's very successful, could be a real bummer for everyone else when they came out there. So yes, you could use it in that way, or you could have the machine actively criticize what you put in there in place in a way that's maybe more tolerable. But yeah, I think the playtesting area is quite interesting.
That then informing, giving you decisions, and say I'm making quite a complex game, with big like mechanics that are complex, be able to shake out those bugs in it and balancing the game faster allows me to get to try different solutions down the line, and then get that back into testing. So this kind of next phase where you're iterating, you're getting that feedback from this and creating something different and trying it again, both using AI and in your physical testing with humans, and doing that, you're getting a faster iteration process where you're getting to, it's kind of like a higher quality of a standard of game, because it's not going to be broken. You may have explored other areas and more creative solutions and things like that. And then you get to that iteration phase. And I think the final phase, which is probably where we should stop in terms of like the R&D process, is like that evaluation and then making your decisions. Like you then decide, like, I'm going to make this, I'm going to send it to a printer, or whatever that is. We'll kind of end there. But the idea of like doing that evaluation, you have all this information and you start to use these tools to help create so many more solutions. And myself as a young designer, I don't have the time, I don't have the money resources. I'm able now to create something a very like high standard that may not have been in the world had it not for these tools existed, right?
Well, after you've done these iterations as well, like we've worked out how our dot of a monster or our players moving around, and we know the gaming mechanic is solid, and we've worked out all of the bugs, the fatal flaws. This does give us an opportunity to reskin at a high pace. And, should this have been pony themed or dragon themed or just plain primary colors? Like, it allows us to kind of put those out and get a little bit of response, because there's one thing that, still has to happen is people have to fall in love with it. And
you can ask it to review your pitch, right? And you can ask it to be as brutal as possible.
Yeah, you could have I think in the US you call it Shark Tank, don't you? It's called Dragon's Den here in the UK, but same sort of thing. You could have, a scenario set up, and as I'm describing this, people who are watching or listening can go ahead and practice doing this on the OpenAI models. There were the prompts saying, you know, I want you to be a Shark Tank panel, you know, with describe the different people on the panel, and I'm going to come on and I'm going to describe a pitch to you, and then you're going to give me the script of what they say in response, and I'm going to answer to it. And you can practice that, and you can have as brutal judge as possible, and so on, but in the safety of your own home, and you can practice all that.
And you can ask it to refute the arguments too.
Yeah.
How do I strengthen my argument?
The argument and all that. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is all in the aid of like getting people to buy it, or stakeholders to buy it. And even it's stakeholders, just you yourself, you want it to be a certain standard where you're like, I really like this. And that's one standard. And then say you're working with a partner, you've got 2 other partners who are going to make it for you, but they're the ones that are going to decide as well whether it's going to happen. All the processes you did before that helped get the quality of the standard up is going to help you when you decide to publish the game. And that's at the point where you would have to do all the checks around like the IP creation and all that is in accordance with it being legit. But then at that point, you're just building this model of like getting it to a place where everyone's just like, this is good enough to then create.
Dougal, the question is, no, we're talking about Dougal Grimes here, not past Keith Grimes, but
future Dougal Grimes.
Yeah. You know, so you've had a creator who's used all these tools, has got a much more polished product to come and pitch to you. How are you going to respond to this? Are you going to start getting wise to this? And you know, the first few times you're going to go, oh, this is really good, I'm going to bring them on. And then if everyone's using it, you're like, well, I'm looking for something a little bit more kind of funky now and a little bit more, you know, rough around the edges. I don't know. What do you reckon?
I think that it's already happening, you know, across the board. And for me, it's all about the openness of it and people communicating that they have used these tools. And then, of course, as I just said before this, in terms of the qualifier, we won't launch a product until we're fully vetted in terms of the IP ownership, all those things, right? We're very sensitive as a company to do that because we ourselves are IP owners, you know, and we also partner with creators, and we have done since the inception of the company, to reward creators for their work. So there's a level of sensitivity and scrutiny that will go into that. But as we were discussing before, if it's independent creator who's able to make this, who's come from a background that we wouldn't normally be able to tap into, you know, diverse backgrounds, wherever it is in the world, and they've been able to use these tools to create and envision something that feels wholly different, I feel like by itself, you're going to begin to get this evolution of ideas and different diverse opinions and creativity that will then inform the next stage, which is us doing the evaluation within company, or not just us, any company, evaluating it for it to become a product.
One of the things that Keith mentioned the other day when we were chatting, that this isn't necessarily raising the bar for the development, Keith, but maybe you could touch on that.
Yeah, it's a phrase that I heard. So about 3 or 4 weeks ago, I went to an event and a colleague of mine, a doctor called Don Pimenta, who's the founder of a company called Tortoise, which is a clinical co-pilot. So it's a company for which I'm an advisor. Terribly exciting company. Parking that for a moment, he was speaking to someone on a panel discussion. And within that, he used the phrase that artificial intelligence will act to empower and augment the workforce and raise the quality of everyone's work, and therefore lead to not so much raising the bar, but raising the floor. And I thought that was a really, really good description of it, because actually subsequent to that, people are starting to do studies as to the impact of using generative AI in the workplace. And a paper that came out just a couple of days ago, that Boston Consulting Group, I think it is, they did a study over a few months where they took a small proportion of the consultants and let them have access to using ChatGPT, and some that didn't. And what they found is that those that did use it without much in the way of additional training were substantially more productive, produced much higher quality work in a much shorter period of time. And those that were performing less well improved the most, thereby giving some evidence to this concept that it kind of raises the floor on this as well. And maybe, you know, as I was talking to past Keith about his idea, that, if more and more people are using this, then maybe you're going to see this floor raised. And therefore, the question is, well, then how do you differentiate between all these different ideas? I think that's an important point. The other important point is that, well, this is all great if you can get access to AI, but what if you can't get access to AI? It's not as free out tap water type thing just yet. Whoever controls that. So there's complexities in here, but the promise of being able to sort of reduce that lower end of performance, be that in the medical workspace and healthcare workspace, which is where I'm interested in, or in the board gaming one, is really interesting.
Well, I can't wait for this oil rigger battle game to come out.
Well, so this is the moment in the past where future Keith has come back, given advice to past Keith, and then future Keith teleports, he gets into like a
DeLorean.
Yeah, no DeLorean. What would it be, Keith? It would be like...
No, it would be our old Grimesmobile. It'd be the
Caravel.
Yeah.
And goes back to future, and then past Keith goes and gets an eyebrow ring, grows out his rat's tail. But no, that's a pretty good. Just to kind of wrap a little bit of that up, which I think is interesting for solo creators. It allows people who have a restriction in access to resources or access to, money, like their time, they work in like 2 jobs and things like that. There's so many different barriers able to create. And then if you look at the whole process we're talking about here, a lot of the things we talked about there is like shortening the time. The raising the floor is such a great phrase. It's that for me is interesting, just as my role working with external creatives all over the world. It doesn't matter where, like the old cliche of like a good idea can come from anywhere, is so true. You see it time and time again in the whole industry. So more people creating, the better. It just means more competition for you, David.
In the game space, we welcome it, right? More people to play with.
Well, it's a game in and of itself, is it not? There's all this comes in, and the other thing, of course, is that remember you can use generative AI to tell you how to make games. If you have no idea, I can talk you through all these basics
how
as
to
well.
make a game.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how good it will be at that, and you'll probably look at it and scoff. Do remember that the current generations of AI and generative AI are prone to hallucinate and make mistakes in a very plausible way. And so you might be told how to make a game and think, well, this is great. And then you turn up at Dougal's doorstep and they go, what on earth is this? Who told you this? They're an idiot.
I think still today it's better for that mood board sort of feeling, just to help get the juices flowing.
Kind of for context for viewers who are listening from future Keith's time, right now we're recording at a time when there hasn't been very much legislation around AI. It's still very new, and we're looking at things like ChatGPT and Midjourney, and our minds are being blown by how cool it is. But technology is moving so fast, and in a couple years, new technologies are going to come out. Maybe AI won't be hallucinating anymore. Maybe you can just write down like your idea for a game, and it'll just output exactly what you want. Rules, gameplay, images, graphics, everything, and it'll just be able to do it. Everything's going to be changing. Everything's evolving.
Everything moves very fast. You're right. Even just 4 hours before I came on this podcast, Google's announced that they've incorporated the latest updated version of Bard in all their Office suite as well.
Yeah.
I haven't had a chance to look at it yet.
Right.
When GPT-4 came out earlier on this year, I swear I probably didn't sleep for about 2 weeks. Things were coming out so fast.
Yeah.
So yes, it's an interesting time. Right now it's probably a bit calmer, but someone will fire the starting pistol on something else, and then we'll be doing something crazy.
Yeah, I still think it's a regurgitation at some point of everything else that it can cull from. So it's like, here's my million images. I'm going to go ahead and make an image from those. And yes, it's going to have a lot more than a million. It's going to be looking at the trillions and everything. But I still think there's that one creative spark that we've got inside of us that's going to be hard to replicate. It's that one thing that has never been seen before.
has not been seen before, what falls distinctly outside the training set and couldn't be conceived of that as opposed to being very, very spectacularly remixed. I think you're right. The question is, AI maybe is like endlessly generating, within these two bounds, going inwards and inwards and finding a lot of depth and interest in there. The question is what's outside that. That's coming, I'm sure. So right now, let's just enjoy the advantage that we have. Says Future Keith.
Says Future Keith. This has been a blast getting to talk to both Keiths and Dougal, the brothers Grimm.
Dude, what did I do? Two Keiths. Oh God.
Yeah. I think Dougal, what that says to me is how the esteem with which you hold me, that the first thing you would go to is your own older and better brother. And I think that is laudable.
Before we go, we like to ask a series of rapid fire questions using our hidden roll die. Each die corresponds to a question that we're going to ask you, and kind of fire off the top of your heads here. But I'm going to roll for you since you guys can't reach through the screen. But
and I'll look at some of these AI generated questions and see what.
Here we go.
All right, what are we getting?
All right.
The sword, the dagger. Which game turns you into a competitive werewolf during a full moon?
Board game. Let me just try and think. The game that I'm most competitive at in that.
We got pretty competitive over Star Wars Risk, which I think.
Star Wars Risk. Oh my goodness. Yeah. I'd go for that.
Yeah, which is a remix. It's not really Risk. It was Queen's Gambit. I think it got launched with the Phantom Menace. And it was the Queen's Gambit originally, and then they refitted it for Risk. But it's a really great game, 2-player game that follows the Return of the Jedi and the Battle of Endor and stuff. And me and Keith, we really,
you got into it.
It got really heated.
got pretty spicy. Yeah, that was the end of the first lockdown when you came across and when you were quarantining. We had it on the table in the demilitarized zone between my bedroom and your bedroom.
Oh, we would take the moves. Yeah.
All right.
Go good.
Second roll.
The star. You are stranded on a desert island with a group of penguins. Name 3 games that you're going to take with you to keep morale high. Thank you, AI, for such a good question.
Oh my God. Dougal, you go first and I'll go second. Unless you know, I've got some answers.
Well, definitely like a penguin-related one, like Ice Cool would be pretty fun. Or Hey, That's My Fish. There was a game called Hey, That's My Fish, which was a tile game with penguins. And what was cool is you would move your penguin, and then when you moved the ice, it was like little hexagons. And when you moved off one, that one would disappear. So it was this kind of territory kind of acquisition game. And
I own it.
Yeah. So I think it was Hey, That's My Fish, or Hey, Thank You for the Fish. That would be a good one to play with the penguins.
Taking the penguin thing serious.
Given that there's three penguins, Splendor, 4-player Splendor. Well, I'm assuming these penguins can play Splendor, but I'd have Splendor with all the expansion kits.
You can't hold the tokens with their flippers.
I win all the time. That's fine. I just have them frustratedly flapping at the tokens. Yeah.
Wait, is it me and Keith stranded? That would be horrible.
It's you two and some penguins.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's a play game though.
Me and Keith, well, then we'd have a 2-player. You'd have to have like solitaire games, man. Like, I think me and Keith would have Splendor. We got Hey, Thank You for Fish. We've already talked about the Risk one, but I know like Codename. Well, we couldn't play it with 2-player.
Well, Codenames Duet is out there, which is a great adaptation.
Duet. Yeah, Codenames Duet is that's one of my top ones. We wouldn't be able to do Ball. We used to play Balderdash so much. Like that was
Balderdash.
one.
Oh my God, what a great game! Yeah.
But
playing Balderdash with my grandmother. Actually, yeah. So this isn't quite the same, but just a quick one is my grandmother, who's since passed away, was very game at this, and we would play games. We would play Balderdash. You'd have to make up films and so on, and synopses of films or anything, and we would write the most incredible film. Oh my God! But she would have to read it out. That was the thing. She would. That was the best thing. And she'd feeling upset about it. It was very funny.
Yeah, the game became, it wasn't anything about Voller. We didn't actually play the game. We just waited for that round where Grandma would pick up and she would be in tears of laughter trying to read this absolute obscenities that we had made forced her to say. And she went through them all. Barely understanding what 90% of it meant.
Yeah.
There must be something special about games with Grandma. I don't know how many guests have brought up playing games with Grandma. It's been a lot.
Oh,
it must be it must be in our DNA. All right, we got one final roll before we wrap this up. The $. Okay, if money were confetti, which classic game would you turn into a Broadway musical?
I'd turn Star Wars into a Broadway musical.
Oh, that's cool.
Star Wars would be a great one. Because you can almost sort of imagine the Grease Lightning type sequence when you're sort of mounting a machine gun onto the front of it and everything. So yeah, I got to go for Star Wars.
I'm only going to say it because I was hanging with him last night with the inventor of Bop It, Dan Klitzner. Bop It as a musical would be kind of fun because you could go
twist it.
It would be like kind of like dance, but then it would be call and response with the crowd. So it would be like hyper interactive, and like every seat would have a button. And
you get eliminated. You get eliminated if you don't do it right. It ends up with one person, and they're brought on stage.
You have to get out. Get the hell out of here.
Guys, this has been unreal. I feel privileged getting to spend the last hour plus with two of the Grimes.
What a blast.
Yeah. So thank you guys for
get all of us on, all 6 of us on for a hyper episode.
Let's do it.
Oh my God. But thank you both. This was really fun.
Yeah. Thanks a bunch.
Yeah.
Till next time.
Brilliant.
This has been Hidden Roll, the brains behind your favorite toys, games, and all things play. If you like what we're doing, the best way you can support us is to share us with your favorite brains. Please thumbs up, leave a review, and follow Hidden Roll Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or TikTok. You can also sign up for our newsletter at www.hiddenrollpodcast.com for a monthly sneak peek at our upcoming content. That's Hidden Roll, ROLE, podcast.com. Our episodes are available on all major listening platforms, or if you'd like to see our beautiful faces, all of our content is available to watch on YouTube. If you know of someone who would be a great fit to appear in our podcast, or if you'd like to learn the story behind any toy or game, send us an inquiry at hiddenrollpodcast.com/suggestions. Or let us know on our social media. We love to hear your feedback and ideas. Once again, special thanks to Pop, People of Play, the one-stop hub for all toy and game inventors. Visit www.peopleofplay.com to learn more. This podcast is also made possible by the continued support of the brains who never grew up, inventors of play, Streamline Design. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.